Welcome, everybody. It's so wonderful to have you with us, and we're so thrilled that so many people are interested in this topic. We will give our guests maybe another 10, 15 seconds to join the webinar, and then we'll commence. Well, greetings and thank you for joining us from all over the world. Welcome to the Science of Philanthropy seminar series. My name is Amir Pasic. I'm the Dean of the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. We are convening these seminars in lieu of the annual conference this year, but we will be back together in Indianapolis next September. We have a terrific lineup once a month through May, and if you joined us today, you will receive notifications for all of the seminars to come. Each one is hosted by one of the organizers of what we call SPI, the Science of Philanthropy Initiative. So I hope you will make this a monthly habit. And we are all trying to use our pandemic circumstances to experiment with dialogues and conversations that might advance our efforts in new ways. To start us off, we have the founding figure of SPI in dialogue with the leaders of two associations of professionals whose callings are devoted to unleashing the power of generosity in our societies. This dialogue of researchers and practitioners is fundamental to the Science of Philanthropy Initiative. And we will hear more about the Science of Philanthropy Initiative, also known as SPI, from John List, the Kenneth C. Griffin Distinguished Service Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago and founder of SPI. Joining John, we have Sue Cunningham, President and CEO of CASE, Council for Advancement and Support of Education, which supports more than 3,600 schools, colleges, and universities worldwide in developing their alumni relations, communications, fundraising, and marketing operations in order to advance their institutions. We are also joined by Mike Geiger, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, AFP, representing individuals and organizations that raise more than $100 billion in charitable contributions every year around the world for countless causes. Today, we have a unique opportunity to participate in a conversation between scientific research and practice in the real world. Please read more about John, Sue, and Mike, as they have truly distinguished careers that inform their efforts to engage in activities that help shape philanthropy. As we jump in, please formulate your questions and place them in the Q&A box. We will get to them as we warm up. John, Sue, and Mike, thank you so much for being with us. John, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about the Science of Philanthropy Initiative, how it got started, and what it aims to achieve.
Sure. Thanks so much, Amir, and thanks everyone for attending. Before I get started, I want to thank the team, Jamie, Amy, Diana, and others. Thanks so much for all of your effort here. So SPI actually started in 2012, and some co-conspirators were Anya Samek and Mike Price early on. We received a very generous Templeton Foundation grant around the big idea of trying to promote the use of the scientific method within nonprofits. A very bold and unabashed idea. But we also paired that with three more specific empirical and theoretical questions that we wanted to try to tackle. One was simply, why do people give? The second one was, how do people give across the life cycle and across cultures? The third one was more broad. How do we increase philanthropy and how do we keep people engaged in helping causes? Now, over the years, we've tried to promote these partnerships between academics and practitioners and organizations by giving out grants. We've given out dozens and dozens of research grants to many PhD students, associate professors, full professors, etc. We now have over 60 papers that we've published on our website, spihub.org, and that's paired with a series of conferences. We started our first conference in 2013. This was a conference that was smallish in nature because we were just getting started. In 2017, we received a little bit of high voltage when we partnered with Amir and his colleagues at the Lilly School And in fact, I say high voltage because our parallel sessions in that 2017 conference actually increased over 60%. So we were reaching a lot larger group in 2017. Since then, we've continued to have conferences and work with organizations. Last year, we had our first SPI webinar, which because of COVID, unfortunately, was just like we are today, virtual. We have a special issue that we're working on in an academic journal called Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization, which the Lilly School people in here at Chicago, Chris Clapp and Luigi and myself are working on. Now, in the end, what we're still up to is trying to continue to develop partnerships to promote the scientific method.
Thank you, John. Let's turn to Sue now, to the other side, to the practitioner side. You represent professionals who seek to advance philanthropy in a broad range of educational institutions around the world. Tell us a little bit about Kay, Sue, and kind of what kind of knowledge and research your members find valuable.
Well, thank you, Amir, and it's a pleasure to be here with you and together with John and Mike and those who are participating in today's session. So as you mentioned, CASE serves a community of professionals who champion educational advancement. And so we have something like 90,000 individuals working in those 3,500 institutions, which are schools, colleges, and universities in about 82 countries around the world. And as the professional association for advancement practitioners, and when we say advancement, we're incorporating communications, alumni relations, marketing, and fundraising. CASE defines the standards and competencies for the profession and fosters their dissemination and application across the world's educational institutions. So when I look at a major piece of our work are our reporting standards, and we published our first set of global reporting standards last March, which really embrace they're the backbone of the profession. Doctors have standards, and architects have standards, lawyers have standards. These are the standards for educational advancement and for the advancement profession worldwide. We published such standards for about 40 years, but these are the first standards that are truly global. So we have a deep dive into different parts of the world, from Singapore to Mexico to Canada and so on, looking at specific contexts. But the broader standards are really the roadmap for anyone working in professional advancement in terms of the ethics and the standards, and also what we count and what we don't count and what it's appropriate to do, and really excited about the engagement with those around the world. We also provide benchmarking data for fundraising for campaigns, which help our members truly understand how their performance changes over time, and of course, how it compares to their peers and industry trends. And again, because we're doing this on a global scale and using metrics that are comparable from Canada to the UK to Australia, New Zealand to the US, there's a real opportunity for learning in myriad directions. And the final thing I'd reference by way of introduction is the alumni engagement metrics that we introduced coming up 3 years ago now. But many educational institutions over the years have developed models for alumni engagement metrics. And for the first time, CASE introduced them on a global scale. And we know, for example, that there are different surveys that measure alumni engagement purely as a proportion of alumni giving. And in my mind, that's a profoundly blunt tool and marred for many different reasons. And so our alumni engagement metrics are a far more thoughtful way of measuring alumni engagement across volunteering and giving and participation in different ways. And it's exciting to see those grow and build over time, and looking forward to alumni engagement through those metrics being redefined in terms of how that's measured across the educational sector worldwide.
Well, Sue, I think that's marvelously useful for your members, but I think it also provides a lot of raw material in terms of generating the facts on the ground that could be useful to more researchers, and I hope more of them will be aware of the fact that these are the basic facts that you are helping to establish and generate. Let me ask you a follow-up question in terms of the thought leadership that CASE provides to its members. I think the benchmarking and the standards and more more expansive ways of measuring alumni engagement are all to the good. But when you're looking for thought leadership, do you generate it all internally? Do you ever look outside of CASE for inspiration and guidance to provide your members?
No, we absolutely look outside as well as looking at the resources that we build within CASE. And, there are, of course, myriad different resources and sources from which to do so. If one looks, first of all, at the unique position we're in working with our member institutions, we can, working through them, have a deep understanding of some of the successes and outcomes. So, for example, the incredible work that happened in the state of Washington 2 or 3 years ago, that affected for the first time, I think, a context in which, through their work with industry and right across the educational sector and government, introduced a new government funding package partnered by local corporations that provided access scholarships across the sector, across the states, and participating in a panel, as I did in Seattle a couple of years ago, and listening to a local politician who was talking about supporting higher education being something that for the first time was a vote winner. And if only that were replicated across all 50 states and around the world, that would be a marvelous thing. So learning, and another example is our interaction with Oregon State University around engagement scores and metrics, or the University of Florida and the great work they're doing in artificial intelligence, or some of the work that's happening around alumni engagements and parts of the fundraising, the Tecnológica de Monterrey, one of our Latin American members. Also, when we're looking at global trends and initiatives, not only do we have about 90,000 individuals who are members of our member institutions, but we also have about 4,000 people who volunteer with CASE in different ways every year. And in fact, this morning we were orienting our commissioners, which are our think tanks, as you will remember, Amir, from your time at CASE. And so that brings together just under 70 people twice a year to really think and discuss horizon issues. And we have members of those think tanks from Australia to the US, to Canada, to the UK, to Latin America. So gathering that global perspective is really helpful. And last but certainly not least is the work that emanates from the Lilly School and the partnerships that we have there, and with other academic centers who are doing research into this work around the world.
Great. Well, I think we're going to explore the different cultures that tend to dominate in the world of practice and the world of research and science. But I think there's one commonality, and that is the curiosity to improve and the curiosity to learn across both communities. So that's wonderful to hear. Let's move on to Mike. Your membership spans the full range of nonprofit institutions, of small, large, you name the segment of society. Tell us a little bit about AFP, where your members get the knowledge that they need to do their fundraising, and what kind of research they wish they had that they maybe don't have yet.
Well, thank you, Amir. It's amazing to be on here with you and Sue and John. I just want to sit back and listen and actually not participate and just take notes, but I don't think that's how this works. So AFP, our members are the individuals, and we represent over 26,000 fundraisers, and they are members as individuals, and then they work for their various nonprofit organizations around the world, and they raise funds for every conceivable cause. So you mentioned in a brief intro that our members raise about a little over $100 billion. And when you think about the fact that last year, I think it was $437 billion that were raised, that means that our members raise about a quarter of all the funds raised. And that's really impressive. And it puts us in a unique position because our members obviously work for all sorts of causes, all sizes of organizations, in all kind of fundraising specialities, whether that's direct mail or major gifts or planned giving, you name it, our members work for it. And of course, I have to mention, because October is Ethics Awareness Month, and that's one of the reasons that AFP was originally created back in 1960. It was to establish a code of ethics for the burgeoning fundraising profession. Ethics is so paramount in fundraising, and our ethics code is the only truly enforceable code in our profession for fundraisers. So we look at everything we do, as do fundraisers, from an ethical perspective. And then in terms of your question of where do our members get their information and what kind of research do they have? Well, I think there's two primary ways. First, there's the informal way, and that's through their local networks and the AFP chapters. We're unique as an organization that we have local chapters. We have over 240 chapters around the world. And that kind of informal local networking and information sharing is really critical to our members. And I think it's one of the advantages, one of the really big advantages of being part of the fundraising community. And we saw this last year, and we're seeing it also this year as we're working our way through the pandemic. Our members have really leaned on each other as fellow fundraisers to help out. And then I think from the more formal perspective, members look to AFP Global for the research and the resources that we distribute. I mean, there's a push-pull dynamic that's happening, right? They're pulling in the specific information that they want, while at the same time, as an organization, we're pushing out new information and ideas that they may not have thought about that is useful for them. And so what do members want? Well, honestly, I think what every fundraiser really wants to see is the results from other organizations that look like them, that have the similar variables and that can show sort of cut and dry results. Now, we all know that one of the biggest problems is that nonprofits are really so unique that even in the same vertical, no two have the exact same set of issues. So the best methodology is really to read proven practices and then test its implementation in their own shops. Now, I'd love to see more qualitative discussions, more focus on tendencies, on similarities, common characteristics, and actions that successful organizations have taken. Now, I mean, a good example would be, what are some of the things that a small arts organization could do versus a larger healthcare facility or a university? And I think that another really critical piece for us right now are the issues around IDEA. And IDEA for us is inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. So these are very specific areas that fundraisers are looking for leadership and guidance right now. And this is something that AFP is focusing on very, very seriously. We just released a larger groundbreaking survey on IDEA in the fundraising workplace that focuses on IDEA. And we did this working with eight other institutions. And there's just so much work to be done in this area, both from the fundraiser perspective, but also from the donor perspective, from the organizational perspective, and the community perspective. So I think we're all gonna have to put more effort, and we're gonna talk a lot about this over these next, I guess, 50 minutes or left, that I really wanna see more research in this area.
Great, thank you so much, Mike. And as I'm looking at our attendees in the box, I see we have both prominent creators of academic and scholarly knowledge, and as well as some leading practitioners. So we have other folks that we can call on to answer the question that I'm not going to ask John. And John, just to share with us a few of the scientific results, one or two to begin with, perhaps, that you see as key outcomes from your perspectives that have helped shape or improve philanthropic practice.
Right. Okay. So thanks, Amir. That's it's a bit like asking which of my 8 kids is my favorite, but let me give it a go. And the reason why is because when you look at what SPI has been able to do, and the community of researchers, many of them are on the call today, it's really been a soup to nuts type of approach. And what I mean by that is there's science around how you attract a first-time donor affects their long-run giving. There's research around why seed money is important, and Jim Andreoni's on the call. He has some foundational theoretical work on seed money and empirical work. Why is seed money important, and how should we use it efficiently? Why people give and how to keep them committed to the cause. Whether at the end to say thank you. Anya Samek is on the call, and she has recent research tackling that issue. So it's really across the board. There is science and insights. I hear what Mike is saying. He's saying, look, every 501c3 is a butterfly. And in some ways, They are, they're unique. They have a unique donor base. They have a unique set of causes that they're trying to approach and expand both diversity and also the types of programs. So I think what that leads me to is there are some foundational results that I think do generalize across organizations. And as Mike said, when they don't, it's really important to look at within your shop. You know, that looks like a cool result. Does it apply to us? The best way to do it is science. It's not gut and saying, well, that doesn't apply to us because our donors are different, or it doesn't apply to us because we do zoologists instead of humans. It's crazy, right? Instead of humans in academic circles, I mean. So in that part, it's almost as though some are using generalizability as a reason not to do science, when in effect, it's a reason to do more science and why we should be looking to scientists. Now, I'm not trying to dodge your question. So I know the Lions want some red meat. So let me give them one example. It's clear that match dollars are invaluable. Okay, so that's just like a scientific law, I would say. Upfront money is invaluable. Using it as a match is important. But the match rate itself matters much less. Okay, so what I'm saying is it's very important to have a lead donor give funds and to advertise that. But the match rate itself, when you're doing a conditional gift, like every $100 you give, an anonymous donor will match 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. What this set of results say is that the match matters, but the rate itself doesn't. So what I would say is don't use really rich match rates, right? Don't waste lead donors' money. Use 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 when you can. That's at odds with what the conventional wisdom was when I first started doing research in the late 90s and early 2000s on this issue. People thought about donations and fundraising more like the law of demand. You raise price, people consume or purchase less of it. That's just not true in this case. You need new types of economic thinking and new types of economic models to explain exactly what happens in this marketplace. But thanks, Amir. I hope that answers your question.
Well, that's, that was one of my favorite ones when I was a practitioner, John. It's like when people would say, let's get a 5-to-1 match. I was saying, well, I'm not sure we need that 5-to-1 match. And we may be kind of overdoing it and using up too many resources when it's just as effective to do 1-to-1. And so that's always been one of my favorite takeaways of why we should pay attention to what you call science or research in that context. Let me ask you, John, again a little bit more about the insights, because you also have insights into the world of engaging customers, if you will, outside of the nonprofit sector. And things seem to be move faster there. They certainly happen at larger scale, and there are more resources to invest to engage customers. What are some of the insights that you may have from the for-profit sector that you think might be interesting to those of us who are in the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say two elements jump out at me when I think about when I'm at Lyft or when I'm at Uber, when I'm working with firms versus when I'm working with nonprofits. The first thing that jumps out is, so when you walk in Uber headquarters, there's a sign on every pillar, or at least there was when I used to be chief economist there, that said, data is our DNA. And every important decision was driven by data that was generated by people within the firm or data that was naturally occurring data. It wasn't just a slogan, it was the culture. Every one of these firms has multiple data scientists, multiple people who are both generating data and examining and exploring data to try to make decisions. That's a fundamental difference. And a lot of you are shrugging your shoulders. You're like, yeah, we don't have the resources. But you do have the resources. We have academics who are lined up from my office here in Hyde Park to downtown, who are, I think, one of the largest untapped resources in the world, who will be standing ready to partner with you. And they typically don't want money. They want data and the ability to partner with you to generate more data to test their theories. And then they can write about it in books or in journal articles, etc. To me, that's an extremely underutilized resource or untapped resource that we have. So that's point one, just what's the culture of data, the culture of science around decision making. Point number two would be exactly as you brought up, scale. So this is a little bit of an unabashed plug. I'll be giving a talk on February 3rd in this series on scale. That's what the book behind me is about as well. Firms look at ideas and they say immediately, can that idea scale? And what are the elements of that idea that give it a shot to scale? We invariably have the same question in philanthropy, and it's starting to come up more and more. When you ask somebody, I'm a fundraiser too, I was a department chair for 6 years, and I've been a fundraiser in that capacity. And when I ask somebody for a gift, for some generosity, more and more what I'm hearing is, how's that gift going to change the world? Is that gift going to scale a program that can change the world in the large? That now is all about, do we have a program or do we have an idea that we were going out and fundraising for that will actually scale? Donors are getting more sophisticated about ROI, about give me a program that will actually scale and make my dollars really useful when we go from the petri dish to the large. So that's one aspect of scaling. The other aspect is for fundraisers, does your fundraising approach itself actually scale? So when you find a result in the petri dish, should you expand immediately to your whole donor base? Or should you be using what I call multi-site trials in the small to learn about what works and then systematically go up to the large, understanding and respecting the heterogeneities that you have in your donor pool? Targets is what you always hear in the for-profit world. And that, I think, will unlock a lot of the capacity that we have in this sector if we start to be serious about the data and serious about the heterogeneities, not only in programs we provide, but also heterogeneities amongst the donors who give to us.
That's fascinating, John. I look forward to your lecture when you come. I think the issues of scale and data as being the new oil, and scale being occasionally problematic in the for-profit sector. So I look forward to you coming here, and thank you for those insights in terms of the different ways that key questions are asked in the for-profit sector. Let's turn back to Sue and Mike, because we still have we have imperfect at best bridges between the world of research and practice, and we still have some communications issues, some different ways of looking at things. So we don't kind of gel together perfectly yet, and I think our conversation today is an attempt to improve some of those ways that research and practice connect. So let's start with you, Sue. What do you think, what do you wish that scholars and researchers knew better about what life is like on the ground when you are engaging in advancement for an educational institution when they study the work that your members do?
Thank you. Well, I think having before this job worked in educational advancement, leading advancement at Melbourne University and Oxford University and St Andrews University, and before that the cultural sector, I think one of the inevitable challenges is these advancement roles are incredibly busy. the expectations keep going up and up and up. We saw in the US last weekend, the first $7 billion campaign at Yale University launched. So the aspiration and the energy and the focus is expanding, and it's not just in this country. I mean, this is happening in many parts of the world. And so the drive towards higher and higher achievement means that the thing that senior advancement professionals are is time poor. And the capacity, therefore, to get their arms around some of the work that is happening in terms of research into the fields in which we're working is really limited. And I think, you know, again, this is a really important and exciting conversation, Amir, because I think there are real opportunities, as John was just describing. I remember when I was at Oxford University working with the British government in the late 2008-9 around the match funding scheme that the British government created to create a greater level of regular giving to the British university sector. And to have the data that you just described, John, in those conversations, because we had 2-3 tiers of matching, and it was, you know, in some respects, it was quite successful, particularly amongst those who were already at a fairly high capacity and for whom match was the lowest. So I think that's sort of really interesting data. So I think finding the opportunities for the nexus between the work that people are doing in the context of academic research and the work that practitioners are doing, whilst appreciating that time poorness, if that's even an adjective, the desire of people to be able to glean what they need to know and then take it and run with it, and thinking therefore about how we can encapsulate the research and connect practitioners with it, and vice versa, in a way that is dynamic and is something that can be done in concentrated and focused periods of time. I mean, Amir and John, you've both been involved in conversations recently that we've been having with John Glear in looking at how we evolve the John Grensbach Research Awards. The case has been running, thanks to the GGNA, for over 30 years on bringing research together with advancement practitioners. So we're really dedicated to really thinking about, you know, the challenges and opportunities, I think, are significant in the future. And as John was describing, the aspirational level of philanthropic engagement, which can often be across institutions, can take institutions and the opportunities that they're delivering upon to a transformational level. And I think the more that we are working, bringing research and practitioner expertise together to be thinking about how this work can be most impactful in the future for transforming lives in society, the better.
Thank you, Sue. Mike, what is your sense of that dynamic?
Well, first of all, I want to say to John, I so agree with data being so important. I've got an MBA and a CPA, and my entire career has been in nonprofit, but it's always been focused around, you know, don't make decisions without data. Data is king, and it is the biggest challenge. You know, you said don't go with your gut, is we've all got different guts, and so it gets really risky if you do go with your gut. I've got to read your book, so I think that's my download on my Kindle for this weekend. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that. So I think I would say, and I don't think you can overstate how overworked most fundraisers are. Working in continuing education and professional advancement, opportunities get harder and harder. And that includes reading about research. So I think that the more scholars and researchers can translate their findings into ideas and into action steps that the average fundraiser can understand and use, the better off the profession will be. And to be clear, that's not all on the researchers. There's plenty of others that touch on this that need to be a part of that. As an association of fundraisers, as curators of information, AFP and others, including CASE and AHP, we all need to help researchers in this. We know how to best communicate with our members. And so we need to help researchers, once they have a study or a survey, to think about how do we message those findings to be the most effective. I would also like to see perhaps more understanding of the pressures of the workplace and how other factors, not just the cause itself, affects performance. So there's always competing interests, right, on a day-to-day level. And it could be the CEOs, it's the boards, it's key volunteers, it's different departments, it's budgets, it's competing budgets as well. And also what other charities are doing. And these can prevent a fundraiser from doing the optimal thing that research might suggest. There's also a really interesting dynamic that I see in research and fundraising. So we are learning a lot lately about fundraising from the fields of psychology and marketing, behavioral economics, organizational development, and data analysis. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, ask any seasoned fundraiser, and the fundamentals still come down to relationships and impact. And that's our core. When fundraisers think about, well, will this idea or research help me? Will it scale? It ultimately comes down to relationships and impact. And then finally, I think scholars, researchers sometimes underestimate the impact that they can have and how they can actually change habits. Honestly, a really good key data point with great messaging can dramatically change what fundraisers do. And I think about the research that we have honored through the Skystone Partners Prize. This year, we honored Dr. Tyrone Freeman and his book, Madam C.J. Walker's Gospel of Giving. And it's about Black women's philanthropy during Jim Crow. And so he's changing the narrative on Black philanthropy. And there is so much to look at there. And so this idea of getting all of these different lessons that we have for fundraisers is so critical. I mean, look at some of the other issues that the Skystone Prize has honored. So Gen X giving, diversity and philanthropy, philanthropic planning, global fundraising, practices of high impact organizations. So these are all issues that have now become part of the lexicon of fundraising. And of course, it's not just because of this award, right? That's just a very small piece of it, but these are things that are important to what we are all doing. We're all facing the same issues, whether it's Sue, whether it's myself, whether it's John. These are issues that we're all faced with and we're all trying to resolve. And what is really great is that researchers are pushing the boundaries on what we know and what we think about fundraising. And that is so helpful to all of us.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Mike. Those are wonderful thoughts. And I think I'll just mention that, the notion of getting kind of key information about what you think the world works from your peers is something that goes beyond the fundraising advancement world. The Hewlett Foundation commissioned a study of, where do program officers, they're so much focused on foundation staff, where do they get their knowledge? And they, surveyed, is it the Chronicle, is it the Stanford Social Innovation Review, or is it the Foundation Review? And they found that on top of any other source, it's the peers, picking up the phone or interacting with your peers. That's where you validate knowledge. That's where you find trusting knowledge. And in my bias, that reveals the fact that, a lot of this work about knowledge happens in communities, whether you're in the community of behavioral economists and follow SPY and follow John List's work on experiments, or you're in the community of CASE or AFP, the community is really important. So I think that continuing to figure out how do you build community across, how do we build a long-term community between researchers and practitioners is something that is one of the key worthwhile elements of what SPY is doing and what both CASE and AFP are trying to do to build those bridges. Because I think research on nonprofits and philanthropy is much newer than in the business world or in the policy world, where we have more established sinews of connectivity there. at the same time. And I know in the audience, we have a lot more people who have insights to contribute in terms of what has worked in the past in terms of connections between research and practice, because it hasn't all been a wasteland. There have been important connections. I think the challenge for us is that we haven't really invested in keeping them going over time as well. So let's turn back to John before we start calling on people in the audience, and kind of your sense of what has succeeded. When did you see, maybe in the early days of SPI, when we had good connectivity, we just haven't been able to institutionalize and keep it going?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's resources. It starts and stops right now with resources, in part because of what all of you have said. You know, I've been doing this for now close to 25 years, and every year it's the same thing. Everyone says they're stretched, and they're stretched time-wise and resource-wise. And I think it's just a fundamental law of fundraising that people are stretched. So we had the best luck with partnerships when we had some resources. And when I say resources, I not only mean cash to run experiments or cash to help fund something, but also human capital resources. This is where Mike, I think, was exactly right, is that people are stretched, budgets are stretched. Almost like when I went to work at Uber and now I'm the chief economist at Lyft, I'm like a luxury good. A chief economist is a luxury good in the sense that when you're flush with cash, you can bring one in, because it's sort of like, let's take a winger on a luxury good. It's not a normal good that we have to have. I want to change that. In this sector, I want people who want to make real change to say, that's not a luxury good. That's a good that we have to have around, just like we have around the relationship builders and the first contact people and the folks who are working with high capacity donors. I understand those are all necessary conditions. We really haven't succeeded until people say either we have to have someone in-house or we want to work with somebody outside who's an expert in data and the science of philanthropy. That's what we need to make this conversation into a success. Now, invariably, what I'm asking then is that humans stop being humans. Here's what I mean by that. As humans, we have what I would call opportunity cost neglect. We don't think about every moment that goes by that we're not doing anything is an actual lost moment that we could have had an even greater program or an even greater set of initiatives. We think kind of like, yeah, Billy did that like this last year and his boss did it like that before. So it's kind of stick with the status quo. We don't think about every moment that goes by is truly an opportunity cost. And in that way, we then go back to saying, let's stick with the status quo. Let's do the rules of thumb. We've succeeded when people start to understand that opportunity cost is real.
And Amir, if I could just, because I'm listening to John speaking, I agree with some of it, but not with all of it. I mean, if I think about March of 2020 and looking at educational advancement professionals all around the world, there was an intake of breath about what do we do? Do we stop reaching out? Do we not do our giving day? Do we not do this appeal? Do we not have this conversation with a significant donor? And the speed and alacrity with which we saw universities with huge advancement teams to schools with tiny advancement teams shifting, and a word much used in the last 20 months, but pivoting so many of the practices. And now as we're looking at the data of the outcomes, our VSE report, our studies in the UK and Australia and Canada, many institutions beat fiscal goals philanthropically last year beyond previous years. You know, the extent to which, and all did not, and there was a slight dip in our VSE numbers. that said, that the alacrity and the speed and the shift in approach to the way people were doing what they were doing was phenomenal. And the outcomes, I think, are a tribute to both donors who are refocusing on mission and what matters most to them during a year of such turbulence, or 18 months or more of such turbulence, and also the speed with which people have transitioned how they think about doing what they're doing. And again, I think this partnership between researchers and practitioners in thinking about how do we inform this shift, not just out of crisis, but for future opportunity and success, I think we're now at a moment where there's a huge opportunity to build from this.
So if I could jump into that.
Do you mind if I could comment on that? Since is that okay, Mike? Just a quick
Well,
comment.
I was just going to say, I think you're actually, I don't think you're disagreeing. I actually think you're agreeing because there's an opportunity cost, and I love that phrase. There's an opportunity cost to the organizations that stopped asking. And all of our research in March of 2020, and really the work done in April and May of last year, showed that the donors wanted to continue to be asked. And the organizations that didn't ask, I think they really suffered greatly from that lost opportunity cost. And they never quite got back to where they hoped to be. The organizations that continued to ask, they, as Sue rightly said, they met or exceeded their goals. So I think the opportunity cost idea is really powerful, and I think that John and Sue, I actually think you're saying very similar things, but from slightly different perspectives.
John?
No, I think that's what I was going to start with that, but then I was going to also present a challenge. So I wrote a paper, I think it's in 2011, that is a very accessible paper titled something like The Market for Charitable Giving. So as an economist, we think about everything as a market. We think about our family as a market. We think about the charitable giving sector as a market. And I got a bunch of data. And the data, when you plot it, if you just look at total giving from individuals in the States, it looks great. In fact, it tracks, like from 1971 until today, it tracks the S&P 500. And people look at that and say, wow, what a vibrant sector. This is just an amazingly vibrant and growth sector. But then if you look at the data in a different way, and let's call it giving per dollar of income, guess what? That vibrant sector does not look very vibrant anymore, because it's in a channel from 2.1 to 2.5% over that entire period. So then I went and got a bunch of religious giving data back to 1927 from the empty tomb. And I plot that in the same paper. That's like 1.3% forever. So this is not a sector that has engaged in serious change. It's growing because people are getting richer. And it's growing because this is a luxury good, and the rich are giving more and more. Just look at all of your data, the data that Lilly just published. It's not growing because there's a bigger base of participation and a bigger base of people joining a vibrant economy. It's growing because the really deep right tail is getting wealthier, and they're giving 5 to 7% of their income, and then they have a bunch of wealth that they're giving on top of that. So just to drive this point home, so Dave Novgorodsky, wonderful economist, I think he's on this call, Magna Mogstad, and I have IRS data that we're looking at. If you just do a first cut of IRS data and just look at single men and single women, and this goes kind of to Mike's point, the wonderful book, which I'm going to read this weekend, but just look at singles. And what you find is that single men give about twice as much as single women. And if you stop there, you would say men are more generous than women. But if you look across the income distribution, so what I mean now is put people with 35,000 in income, men with 35,000 in income, women, and do that across the entire distribution. Women give more than men in every bucket, except for the deep, deep, deep right tail. So if you say, look, who's more generous conditional on income, it's not close. It's women. So this gives us, if we just get initial data and just look a little bit and be serious about what are the true drivers, the data really help us understand the patterns that we see. I'll stop there.
I think that's fascinating. And as you talk about scale, John, I think about concentration also, because that's part of the story that you tell in terms of the concentration of giving. And in our next seminar, we'll hear from a new panel study on nonprofits that looks to see if that also kind of carries over to the receiving end of nonprofits. You know, are the larger nonprofits receiving an even more concentrated proportion of charitable giving as well? But John, you know, and I'd like to talk a little bit about experiments, because, you know, you have brought experiments back into mainstream economics in many ways as kind of the foundation of the scientific method. And experiments do give you some special power, but at the same time, they also get people nervous about the time and the gamble and the risk that it requires on the practical side, and kind of how can I engage in experiments? The stakes are too high, and I can't do that. So tell us, John, a little bit about why experiments are so important, and then some of the reasons people shouldn't be scared about experiments. And then we'll ask Sue and Mike also about how practitioners might view experiments.
No, absolutely. That's a great question. So I think the real cost is, as I mentioned before, the opportunity cost of time and not experimenting. You're just going by day after day after day, not really knowing what works and why. Okay, so let's put that up clear. It's costly not to run an experiment. It's costly not to have knowledge or information about what we should be doing. Okay, now let's first of all talk about the ethics of experimentation. Mike mentioned this earlier, and it's really important to have important ethical guidelines around experimentation, and to make sure that the people who are part of your experiment each one is no worse off, given that they're part of your experiment. So let's take an example. We work with Smile Train for a lot of years, and Smile Train sends 1 million pieces of mail every month, a cold list mail, and they're trying all kinds of different experiments. All we did is we went into what they were going to be doing anyway, and we manipulated things like having a match or not having a match, asking the donor to think of themselves when they're giving rather than thinking of who's going to be the recipient of the gift. That was an Alaska experiment that we just published in Nature. These are things that happen anyway. So when you say we don't want to experiment, you're already engaging with your donors. All I'm asking is do a little bit of perturbations each time you engage with them to see, does a perturbation work? And if it does, start to explore why and go further down that road. So it feels to me like the experimental method itself, it's ingrained in us. We're already doing most of the things we need to do. So there's not a huge marginal cost. The biggest cost is trying to figure out, of the wealth of cool experiments I can do, which one should I do first? That's like the hardest part of the problem. The rest is just subtly change an item in your ask. When we worked with the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point, my alma mater, they had a real problem, as many universities have, in getting participation from recent alum. Seems like a really hard problem that is ubiquitous. Even here at U Chicago, we're pretty low, even though we're ranked 6th in the country. It's still like 57%. So I said, let's experiment with the ask string. Let's send some recent 2012 grads the ask that says, you graduated in 2012. So today we're going to ask you to give $20.12 to support this cause to be a good pointer. That worked. It's a published paper now in 2013 about how we can use the ask string. They were doing the letters anyway. I manipulated the ask string And now look, the donor participation goes up and up and up because of the experimental method. So I'll stop there.
Well, that was a very forceful case for it. So as we're coming close, I'll turn to Sue and Mike and ask them if they have a view, if they want to respond on the experiment view, but also to introduce or to mention the fact that often when I've been interacting with researchers, they love to look at rules of thumb that they could potentially, rules of thumb that have been accepted as a best practice in the field that they could challenge in some way. So if one of the options for you both is talk a little bit about experiments and how you think, if you resonate with John's evangelism about experiments, or whether you can think of other rules of thumb that you would love to see researchers dig into to see, in fact, is this best practice that we all accept really as solid as we think? So, and if there's anything else that you want to make sure our audience leaves today from your perspective that you'd like them to take away. So let's start with Sue and then go to Mike.
Well, a couple of thoughts that I'd make after listening to John's wise words. One is that arguably the last 20 months have been a big experiment. People are, rule one of particularly principal gift fundraising is it's face-to-face. And go figure, look at the success of that engagement. Now, there's lots of discussion about, is the tank going to run dry? And particularly talking to people about relationship building in some parts of the world like Asia, the sense is that face-to-face is really important, and particularly building new relationships and thinking about how we do that. So I think, long story short, to be complacent about how we've always done what we do and continue to do the same is suboptimal. And I think, in my experience, many and the majority of advancement organizations are consistently thinking about how they do what they do and how they might wish to refine it. And as we talked about before, I think as Mike was describing, the more that the work that is happening in a research context can be translated in a way that is accessible, applicable, and easy to access, the better. I mean, I think, another illustration of the way that we've promulgated some of the learning from the research that we do, the VSE, which is a 60-year study or more now in the US and Canada, looking at what John was talking about, looking at philanthropic engagement and the extent to which it's followed the stock market and the impact that financial crises have had in the past. The big picture view is that, as John was saying, that philanthropic engagement follows very closely with the fortunes of the stock market. And looking at the most recent crash, the 2008 crash, before what we've just been through, which obviously, as we know, the stock market behaved in a way that was, I'm not even going to go there, John, this is your expertise. But looking at the big picture, philanthropy built back after 2008 to the educational sector within a couple of years. But when you break it down and look more deeply at the journey for individual institutions from 2008 onwards, what we learned was that those that had continuity of leadership and that did not pause on investing in their advancement work were the ones for whom that roughly 2-year window was true. Those that pulled back, as John was describing, or hesitated or had huge changeover in leadership, saw a far longer build. So long story short, I think we're all arguing fiercely in favor of how can we bring this research and the data together with the work of practitioners to derive greater support that impacts society in a positive way.
Well said, Sue. Thank you. Mike, you have the last word.
Yeah, I feel like I should give Sue the last word because that was really, really, really great. I think so. I am entrepreneurial by nature, and when I came into AFP 4 years ago, it was a mindset that I brought with me, and so we have throughout my 4 years, we've tried all sorts of different things. Some have worked, some have not. And I think the key thing is not to be afraid of failure. Failure, I forget, I don't remember who said it, John, you may know, but fail and fail fast, and then learn and adapt and keep going. The challenge is, realistically, is that when when you are a small organization, you actually sometimes don't have the financial luxury of failing, and even on a small level. So that creates a scenario or an environment where you're not as likely to try new things out. But even in that, you can try small things that don't have a cost factor. So I'm a huge fan of experimenting and trying things, and I really try to look at the for-profit sector and see what can we steal from there. I'm a big believer in theft and stealing from other organizations and from other great practices. I'm not smart enough to come up with a lot of good ideas on my own, so I look to others for those, and then I unabashedly pilfer from them. And
Mike,
so
I
think
call that arbitrage.
Arbitrage. Okay. So I think that's really important, and I guess my parting words are really research can help us with experimenting, and we can learn from the research that's been done, and the research can in some cases be our opportunity to try things that we wouldn't otherwise try. We can see how it's been done, and maybe we can steal from that research and use it. But we should never stop trying new things, because if we do, we're just not going to keep moving forward, which we need to do. As Sue said, the last 20 months has been one big experiment, and it absolutely has been, and it's not over. So let's keep experimenting and helping each other and learning from each other.
And that's a wonderful way to close our session, and to remind ourselves that curiosity is not about stasis, it's about movement and innovation. So I want to thank John, Sue, and Mike for a stimulating and enlightening conversation. There was a technical question in the Q&A that I hope John and his colleagues can respond to. I didn't think it was going to be right on point in terms of our current conversation, which I think would be wonderful to revisit in a year from today or some period, just to see how the quality of what we're talking about may have changed. And I want to thank all of our participants on Zoom. If you have any comments on the substance or the conversation, please do reach out to us. We are trying to build a community, so this is not something where you should feel like you are anonymous. And finally, we invite you all to return on November 4 for the next seminar in this series titled A New Era Panel Study of U.S. Nonprofits and Their Donations. That panel will feature Elizabeth Boris of the Urban Institute, Louis Falk of American University, and Mireille Kim of George Mason University. Thank you all, and please be well. Bye-bye.